Yeah.
Yes, please.
Okay, well, thank you all for attending. There's some formalities I need to go to, and I will stick to the script on this just to make sure I cover everything. So I'm Mike Elsmore, Independent Chair of the Pension Board. I'd like to welcome everyone here today and members of the public to our first ever virtual meeting of the Pension Board on the 25th of June at 10 o'clock. So obviously we're YouTubing, streaming this. My Vice Chair is Andrew Theobald, and he'll take over should my broadband collapse at any point or I lose connection. Obviously we're using technology. This is to ensure we can continue our work. We keep the momentum going. I'm really pleased with this because this Pension Board conference I was on yesterday, the Scheme Advisory Board are going to issue guidance next week encouraging authorities to do this type of thing, virtual meetings. They are aware that a number of authorities have just cancelled meetings. So it's good to see that Sutton are ahead of the game in that sense. We hope everything runs smoothly. Sharon's put a lot of work in preparing us. But, you know, if there is a few hitches, then do please bear with us, and we're being live streamed. Before we move to our first item of business, I'll conduct a roll call of board members, and that's to enable us to register your attendance. Can you confirm by confirming your name when it's called and stating whether you have any declarations of interest? So we'll do declarations of interest at the same time as the roll call. So, Mr. Andrew Theobald.
Yes, good morning. And brief declaration of interest. I am in receipt of a very small pension annually from the London Borough of Sutton from when I was a councillor, but it's less than £500 a year.
Okay, Michael Curran. Has Michael managed to join us? Well, hopefully Michael's sorting out the technology with help from Cassie. Chris Reeve. Saw Chris on.
Yeah, I'm here and no interests.
Thank you. Angela Russell.
Hello, Mike. I'm here and I have no declaration of interest.
And William Cody. We haven't heard from William, have we, Sharon?
No, I was unable to speak to him. So I had no confirmation he was joining and no apologies. So we're not sure yet.
Okay, and I have to formally ask for any apologies for absence.
No apologies have been received. Thank you.
Yeah, so it's good timing, Tamara arriving. So before we start, I'd like to welcome Tamara Burnell to her first pensions board. And what circumstances, Tamara, to welcome you in. And I should congratulate Lindsay Gamble, who was Tamara's predecessor, on a new appointment at Westminster Council. So the previous director of finance has obviously nabbed her by the looks of things. But no, good luck to Lindsay. Okay, just a few key points that Sharon's asked me to raise. I'd like to remind members that there are no exempt items on the board agenda. If you wish to ask a question or have any points of clarification on any exempt papers from the 10th of June Pension Committee, these are the exempt appendices B and C at item 6. If these items are to be discussed, we will need to move into exempt session. Exempt items will be taken at the end of the meeting, so hopefully we won't have to do that. After that point, I'll have to move a motion, the usual exclusion motion. Just a few points on protocols for today. I would like to ask you, when you're not speaking, turn your camera and microphone off just to save the bandwidth. I'll allow plenty of time for members to speak on items, and shall make this very clear as we move through the agenda. Therefore, please only speak when I call on you to do so. When you speak, turn your camera on. We'd like to see you. When you speak for the first time, please state your name clearly before you begin. Members should introduce themselves. Well, it says title and name. I don't think we need to know whether you're a Mr., Ms. or Doctor, but there you go. If you want to raise a point during the meeting, please use the chat box and type question, debate or point of order. I think most of it, questions or comments will be fine. So that really does the protocols, really. And if you put in a question, we'll endeavour to bring you in. If by any chance, you know, you want a question, I don't pick it up, then always wave or something. You put your camera on and wave. That'll be fine. Okay, let's move to the minutes of the previous meeting, and you'll have to bear with me. I have various papers on the floor and around me here. So we're now looking at the minutes. And we've got 3 sets of minutes. So, Sharon, you might have to help us here. But let's go to the 12th of December. Well, yeah, let's do it in reverse order. 12th of December minutes. So, are you happy they're a true record? Unless I hear otherwise, I'll take that.
Agreed, Mike.
Yeah, good. Yeah, we'll take that as agreed. The 10th of October minutes, unless somebody shouts, I'll take that as agreed.
Agreed.
Yeah. And the 27th of June minutes, and we'll take that as agreed as well. Okay, Sharon, is that fine? They're all agreed. Nobody's dissented. So we take that. So that moves us on.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I've noted that. I just wanted to highlight to you. I see that Mr. Cody has joined. If you want to check declarations. Thank
you, William. On the roll call, I ask for any declarations of interest. So this is your opportunity to. No declarations of interest. That's fine. Okay, that moves us on to item 5, which is one of our key items, pensions administration update. And David Kellen is going to take us through that. So, David.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just running through the report then that went to the Pensions Committee. First thing we pick up on there is in relation to COVID-19 and the response to that. Consistent with a lot of other government departments, we are working remotely as a team. That seems to be going quite well. We do have 1 or 2 officers still attending the office once or twice a week to deal with physical posts in and out of the team. But in the main, people are working remotely, and as I say, that's going quite well for us. We have had some guidance issued for both scheme administrators and employers from the LGA, which is available on their website. We have circulated some of the frequently asked questions to employers that they could then distribute on to their employees. We in turn have also done that internally with Insight through the London Borough of Sutton. But again, that's available on that website if anyone wanted to have a look at that. It hasn't created any particular pressure on us as an admin team as such. We did think potentially there would be a small, there has been a small increase in the number of deaths, which is up, looked at the period from the 1st of March to the 4th of June. And that represents a 20% increase on the number of deaths from last year, which sounds quite a lot, but I mean, in number terms, we're talking about probably 20 additional cases for the same period last year. So whilst it is an increase, it's been manageable within the team and our current procedures. Looking at the monitoring of complaints, we haven't had any new ones during that period, either ombudsman cases or IDRP cases. There has been a development on one of the cases previously reported to the board that did go to the ombudsman. This was around an individual who wanted to transfer out their pension benefits, but was within 12 months of their normal pension age and therefore wasn't permitted to do so. He did progress that case up to the ombudsman, and the ombudsman found in favour of Sutton and required no further action of us as an administering authority. So that one's now dealt with. In terms of the valuation, rates and adjustment certificates were issued by the actuary, Barnett Waddingham, and then employer results have been issued to our fund employers. That's all been done now. In terms of end of year and annual returns, a slight update on here. So at the time of writing, employers were required to submit their annual return to the section no later than the 7th of May. When this report was written, 59 of the 76 were in. We've just got 1.5 returns outstanding now for Sutton. So just those two. One of those returns is for one employee. And as I say, the other one is half their return. Basically what's happened there is that they've changed payroll provider mid-year. So we've had the later part of the year, I think they're having problems persuading their former payroll provider to provide the information for the first part of the year. So we're trying to work with them at the moment to try and get that resolved. But in the main, we've got that done. That then forms part of the process that will now apply in terms of applying the care evaluation to those records, and then ultimately seek to issue the annual benefit statements no later than the 31st of August. Pensions increase, that was applied to Sutton pensioners and our deferred pension members with effect from April 2020, and that all went very smoothly and has all been done and completed. In terms of pensions administration software, we've continued to work with Civica. We're now very, very close to implementing a new work distribution system amongst the team, which is driven by priority level rather than an alpha split basis, which is what we've worked with to date. So that's looking to go live probably no later than the 6th of July. So it's been a slight delay in terms of setting up profiles to ensure the right work falls to the right people. But we're very close to making that live now. So it's slightly delayed, but will be implemented very shortly. In terms of the recovery of overpayments, so typically we're looking here at where members have passed away, although not exclusively. We introduced a new procedure in terms of recovering an overpayment that's been made to deceased pensioners. Essentially how that works now is with the issuing of an invoice to the estate, rather than it previously where it had been collected from any ongoing pension entitlements, etc. That's in place. It's very early days with that, so it's difficult to say how well that's working at the moment. We've probably issued maybe 2 or 3 invoices so far, so it's not probably enough to say how well that's working, but I don't anticipate any problems with that, and it should be a much easier approach. Moving on to the key performance statistics. Again, we've seen improved performance across all our priority levels, despite the COVID-19 arrangements. The priority 1 cases are now all pretty much exclusively over that 80% target. Because of that, we're now, whilst not taking our eye off the ball on those high priority cases, we are trying to place a bit more emphasis now on the sort of lower priority but higher in volume cases, which sort of constitute the majority of the backlog. There's a number of things we're doing to address that, but I can come on to that shortly. So you've got, within those statistics there, you can see the priority 1 cases were 88% for April. The full year average for last year was 78%. In terms of open processes, they're actually at the lowest they've been for over 12 months. Currently sat at, at the end of April were 1,227. And then we've got the separation out there between what's overdue by up to 3 months and more than 3 months. I mean, the majority of those that are more than 3 months old are deferred benefit calculations, which, whilst important, there's no sort of material impact on them being delayed. That said, there is a statutory deadline for them to be issued within 2 months of the date of leaving, and we're working towards that at the moment. One of the things we're doing there is we've employed it's not quite started yet, but we're soon to have a temp on board that will be exclusively addressing the backlog of deferred benefit cases. It's quite boring work, but in a sense that probably lends itself to a temp in the sense that it's quite repetitive, and so they should be able to clear quite a good volume of those within a reasonable time period. We've got the pensions online numbers there as at the 4th of May. Again, we've got the adherence to process deadlines separated out into the 3 priority types. This first table is excluding pended periods. So what that means is that the period during which we might have a piece of work where we're waiting for information from a third party. So that could be the employer, it could be another pension scheme, depending on what type of work it is. So this statistical analysis here excludes those pending periods whilst we're unable to progress the cases. And you can see the numbers there. We've also produced similar numbers which include that pending period, but we've not put them in this report, but I can do so, or we could do so in future reports if you'd want that. But this is really just to demonstrate what we're able to progress, and that's why we've chosen that method. We've also then just got that final table there with the outstanding processes separated out again into priority level and showing those that are, well, how much is outstanding and how much of that is overdue by a period of more than 3 months. I'm happy to take any questions on that at all.
Okay, just before we go, Michael, welcome. Can you declare any interest? Michael Curran?
Yeah, I've got no interest.
Okay, thank you. Well, you have got interest, but no. Okay. Yeah, let's open it up for questions for David. So,
that's on the pension report, isn't it? Excuse me for
on the pensions administration report. So, if anyone would like to indicate on the chat, I mean, I'll kick it off if you like. David, just out of interest, that ombudsman case, you said that you didn't allow the transfer out. Could you just tell us, a bit of background on that, why you didn't allow the transfer out, etc.?
Yeah, sure. So the situation was essentially that an individual requested a transfer out value, which was provided to them. Subsequent to that, they then make an election as to whether or not they wish to proceed with a transfer out to an alternative fund. Unfortunately, in this case, between obtaining the transfer value and then subsequently making an election to make the transfer, the individual had reached the age of 64, which put them within a year of their normal pension age. And once they're within that year of normal pension age, the regulations don't permit us to make the transfer. We did seek advice from both the local government association and we received some unreliable advice, as it turned out, from the individual's financial advisor. But having sought the relevant advice, we did take the view that it wasn't permitted and rejected it on that basis. It went through both IDRP stage 1 and stage 2. All with the same outcome, and then progressed ultimately to the Ombudsman, who took the same view as us, that the regulations didn't permit it and that the transfer couldn't go ahead.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other member? Just while I'm waiting for people to indicate. Yeah, Michael.
I went to the local government conference last year, and the pensions regulator was mentioning 4 points on transfers out, which I'm sure you're aware of, but he did make special point of them. And the 4 criteria they found that pension funds were not doing were ensuring the member had taken independent financial advice, had the member been provided information about scams, have procedures been established to check who signed the transfer, and lastly, to obtain a payslip for transfer to another employer.
Okay. In terms of those specifically, so in terms of the member taking financial advice, we would do so in circumstances where it was a transfer out of more than £30,000 to a defined contribution scheme. In those circumstances, we do insist that the member has taken financial advice. We require them to complete a form that's also completed by the person who's given that financial advice. So we do that. In terms of we don't do it in other circumstances. So if it was a transfer from local government pension scheme to the teacher scheme, for example, we don't have any such requirement for that. So it's really, we only focus those forms that are really only on transfers over 30k to defined contribution schemes. In terms of scams, we do have a leaflet that we now issue as part of our standard transfer out package, if you like, when people request a transfer value. That's a scam that a leaflet used to be known as the Scorpion leaflet, just through the image that was on the front of it. It's been updated a couple of times since, but that then informs people of some of the things to look at around scams. In terms of procedures and checking the signing of an election to transfer out, we would make a comparison between the signed document from the member and the documentation that we've received previously, to ensure that we've got a match there, just to make sure that we're satisfied that it's one and the same person. The final point is something we don't do. So we don't request a pay slip, I think is what you mentioned, from their new pension or their new employment or pension provider. That's something we haven't done. Something we could take away and have a look at.
David, I understand there's a pensions reform bill going through, and that will be the payslip point Michael raised. I think will be legislated for. So yeah.
Again, if we need to, then we'll look at that and maybe introduce that. But the other three, I think we do satisfy. That one, I'll take away and have a look at. Yeah.
Okay.
Just out of general interest, they also noted that 1 in 6 pension statements don't comply with the data requirements, which I found quite surprising.
Yeah, I mean, I think ours our compliant rate would be much higher than that. I think.
Michael, was that LGPS specific or was it public?
No, it's LGPS specific.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we do our best, and we produced some numbers last year. I mean, we were. I think we're well ahead of that rate, to be fair. But when we produce the statements this year, then we can produce some numbers for the board to indicate, where we've been able to produce statements, where we've not been able to produce statements, and then it's something that the board could have a look at and consider.
Okay. Any David? Could you just remind me that the priority 1 indicators? Could you give us a flavour what type of things are in the priority?
Yeah. So typically that will include death cases, retirement cases, and some transfer out cases. The priority 2s are more transfer ins, and some other. I'll just check, and then moving on to priority 3, you've got things like deferred benefits, refund calculations, that kind of thing. So, but the priority 1 is principally I'd say 90% of its makeup is retirement and death cases.
Yeah, I mean, I just wonder whether it's worth future putting an appendix in, actually detailing the mandatory stuff in some detail.
Yeah, I mean, we did used to include a summary actually of that, but I'll look to put that back in so we can.
I'm thinking of the set. I've got them in front of me, sadly. The 7 sort of mandatory ones. Just stick it in an appendix.
Yeah,
I think what might be.
Okay. I'm kind of lost.
I can see. Has anybody else lost contact?
I can't hear a thing at the moment.
I mean, it's so big.
Yeah.
Me, you lost. Hello.
Sorry, Mike. I lost you.
Have you got me now?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I'm just saying the death numbers are sobering, although the absolute may not be great, 20%. I was just saying I saw equivalent from Southwark about a week ago, and they're probably, they're probably at 33% up. But the staggering thing with Southwark is the spouses and partners are showing a 133% increase. So I expect the inner London figures are probably even worse.
Yeah.
There you go.
I mean, that 20% would encompass all death cases. So that would include deaths of pension members and the sort of any ongoing benefits that we're paying to a spouse or child pensioners.
Yeah.
That's just the deaths in total. So last year for that period, they were at 100. This year, they were at 120.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything? It's a good report, David. Pleasing to see steady improvement. Just a little bit more detailed for my sort of benefit
Sure.
next time. Anything else to add? I think we've done that.
There's probably a couple of things. Oh, sorry, Bradley.
Yeah, I was just going to raise that this will actually be David's last meeting. He is due to leave us in the middle of July. So we have recruited his replacement already, which is good news, but there will be a slight delay with them starting with notice periods. Yes, I thought I'd mention that. And just on your point earlier about the reports and those 7 types of processes, I think that you were referring to, we have we're implementing it's the SIT for guidance that I think you were involved in actually.
Possibly.
Yes. So we're looking to introduce a similar kind of reporting along those lines with the SLA targets, but also the legal and the entire process timescales, so that we can start to identify where processes are missing deadlines, why they are. Is that because we're not getting the right information from different employers, or whether it's the admin team that's causing those delays?
Yeah, Bradley, when your colleague joins, could perhaps you and your colleague just have a 30-minute telephone introduction or something?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'll arrange that.
Well, David, wish you very well.
Thank you very much.
Done a brilliant job, you know, running Sutton and Kingston's not without its challenges, I'm sure. And I think we all wish you well for the future. David, you've been very candid with us and very honest over the years, so we are grateful for that.
Thank you very much, Mike.
Okay, I think you can go. You can go home if you want. Not quite the right. So there is a recommendation that Sharon will beat me up if I don't formally move that. So I think we're noting that report. Just bear with.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, so everyone happy to note it. I'll work on the basis unless somebody dissents. That's agreed.
Great.
Okay, right. Let's move on to item 6, which Tamara is going to introduce for us, and that's the review of responsible investment policy. So thank you, Tamara, and welcome.
Thank you, Mike. Good to meet you all. So the Pensions Committee asked to look again at their responsible investment policy. They'd been reviewing it over the past year, and they wanted to ensure, in particular, that their approach to climate change was incorporated. And they wanted to take a slightly more proactive approach to these issues, and wanted to not just document sort of their thinking and their views, but also their commitment to take action. Obviously, in a policy statement, you can't be too prescriptive about exactly which actions you're going to take, but they wanted to focus particularly on the monitoring of exposure to carbon risk within the portfolio, the extent to which engagement, collective action with other investors might accelerate the pace of change, to step up the amount of due diligence and probing they did of their fund managers and of the London Civ, and then they wanted to use the policy to inform their review of the investment strategy. So to look at options for investment which might have more of a focus on sustainable investing, and then obviously that feeds through to the choices that they've made in their investment strategy decisions. And they were keen that the board be given the chance to input any views, and also that we share the policy statement with other stakeholders as well, because it should be a positive message, something that would be of interest to members and to employers, hopefully.
Okay, and let's throw it open to members. In a way, we, as a board, we're it's not a core function for us to get involved in investments. I think I've always felt that's a matter for the main committee, but you know, we're given the opportunity to comment on responsible investment policy. So I'll throw it open. If anyone's got any issues. I mean, my main issue tomorrow, I think you've headed me off at the pass, and that's really about consultation with other stakeholders. You know, I see it too often that we forget there are other employers in the fund and members, employees, and I expect you've probably got more employers than most admitted and scheduled, although they're not a big percentage. You have got a number there, and as you said, I think it's difficult to get members engaged in pensions issues. Most people put their head in the sand until they're about the age of 50. I think this is people could get quite passionate about these sort of issues. So, you know, the board would, I think, if we're formally minuting anything, we would minute that we would encourage you to do as much consultation as possible, and just ask you to think about how you do that consultation. I guess you'd put something on the website, would you, or a pension members website or something? Have you thought about the method of consultation?
Yeah, so in terms of engaging with members, the website would be the obvious place to do it. In terms of engaging with employers, we've actually got a number of issues that we need to consult with employers on at the moment over the next 3 or 4 weeks. So be working with Bradley to manage that process. We don't want to flood them with 6 enormous documents all at the same time, so that this one gets buried. But in terms of any kind of mail out, it would make sense to coordinate.
Yeah, and I think with members, I'd encourage you to try and give it some sort of structure. If you just ask people, what do you think about SRI? Try and structure in some sort of, I don't know, 4 or 5 questions. Do you agree with monitoring carbon emissions? That type of thing. But you'll know better than we do. Yeah, I think it's a positive. Anything else from any other board member on this one? No, I think general support. So I think, Sharon, we note it. We would encourage the administrative body to do as much consultation as is reasonable, particularly with the membership and employers.
Lovely, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. So that moves us on to item 7, which is a real meaty one. So impact of COVID-19 on the Sutton Pension Fund. So Tamara's bravely put a paper together, which I think is an excellent paper. So Tamara, over to you. Take us through this one.
So this paper was put together partly for our own internal benefit, actually, so that as events were unfolding over the weeks, we could track what we were doing and make sure that we were thinking of all the things that we needed to be doing and all the risks that might be emerging. I mean, to some extent, it was helpful that the various regulators and industry bodies were putting out reams and reams of guidance and FAQs. On the other hand, it was a little bit overwhelming at times. I mean, there were daily updates to most of these documents. So it was quite a lot to keep on top of. And that's why I put in place this kind of tracker, just to make sure we could be aware and monitor what we were doing across these issues. Hopefully the table is fairly self-explanatory. I've tried to list where either us or the regulators have identified that there might be a risk, whether we've identified an impact so far, what actions we've taken, and whether there are any follow-ups that need to be considered. In terms of investment, I mean, that's obviously being monitored on an ongoing basis by the committee and supported by the investment advisors. Their view was that no rebalancing of the fund was required. And so the investment strategy review would continue as previously planned. The cash flow impacts, obviously, is one that's of particular significance for many funds, but actually the Sutton Fund is in a reasonably comfortable position cash flow wise. We are cash flow positive in terms of member inflows and outflows for the next 3 years. So we haven't had any cash flow issues. The one that's slightly more difficult to give a definitive answer on is what it means for employers in the fund longer term. I mean, so far we haven't had employers coming to us asking for contribution deferrals or holidays. We haven't had significant issues, but we can't rule out that might happen in the future. Obviously, a lot of bodies will be reviewing their funding positions over the next year, and so we have to be aware that could become an issue. And the actuaries have asked, have suggested that we should be doing a review of employers, particularly any coming up for exit, but a review of the financial strength of all our employers. So that's something that we'll be looking to take forward. And as I think David's already illustrated, we haven't had any issues on the administration side. Governance has continued. Thanks to Sharon's incredibly diligent work, we've managed to keep all the committees going. Decisions have been made with no particular issues. We're working online with no problem, and touch wood, we've had no significant problems in continuing to operate. So I don't want to say that everything's unchanged, but I believe we're in a reasonably strong position given everything that's happened.
Okay, just on the covenant review, who's going to carry out that review? Is that you going to do it internally, or?
We would certainly want the actuaries to support that process. I mean, we are looking at this on for Kingston as well, and the biggest problem is always collecting the documentation, the articles of association of each entity, and making sure those are up to date. So obviously that falls on us to do. The actual review of the financial position is relatively straightforward. Once you've got the information, it's actually getting the information that is tricky.
I guess you could concentrate on the bigger ones, couldn't you, and give it a priority.
Mike.
Richard wants to come.
Yep, Richard. Yeah,
Mike, it's Richard. Just on that point, I think you're right, because lots of those bodies are people we're doing business with anyway. Yeah. As a council, therefore their financial position is important to us from a whole council point of view, as well as an admitted body point of view. So I think we can, and our procurement team obviously do work around that, and contract management teams in terms of any warnings about that company or rolling reviews of the financial position, not just when we appoint them. So I think we can do some work about integrating that work with the work of the pension fund as well. I mean, not everybody, because but then some of the scheduled bodies are different types of organisations with a different type of, not quite as exposed to the private kind of world of business, I suppose, are they? So it's a different type of pressure maybe for some of the scheduled bodies.
I know. I think that's helpful. I mean, I picked up yesterday nationally, 10% of firms have asked for deferment of their pension contributions, but the LGPS is a much lower figure. So that's quite reassuring. I was pleased to see the comments on rebalancing. I mean, our position as a board is up to you what you do on asset allocation. We would just want reassurance that you've had a discussion about it and you've actually, it's on the radar, and it's pleasing to see that. Any other member on, which I think is a really good report? Andrew?
Yes, Mike. Can I just following on from what you were literally just saying, obviously there were quite disturbing reports this morning in the media about various local authorities talking about potential bankruptcy at the moment. As Tamara said, the money's coming in at the moment, but I just wondered if perhaps Richard's in a position to comment about what the situation is at the London Borough of Sutton. Are they anticipating any difficulties, and is that going to mean that the London Borough of Sutton might want to defer payment into the pension fund?
So I don't think we're in quite as bad a position as some authorities in terms of the pressures we faced over the last 3 months against how government has funded us. Partly because, without going into too much detail, partly because things like parking income, we don't have the same level as parking income as some London boroughs, right, and therefore you can only lose what you had in the first place, kind of thing. So we are, and so I suppose there's a lot of uncertainty at the moment. So there's a cost we've incurred to date, which the government grant pretty much funds, and then there's the economic impact stroke, whatever you think the size and length of a recession might be, and how that impacts the council in terms of the services it provides and those residents who may need our support, whether that's council tax benefit or whether that's any social care services, etc., temporary accommodation. So those type of costs and the longer tail of those, I would say, are more of a concern as we think about our medium-term financial strategy. Okay. So this year, we wouldn't. I don't think there's a need at the current time for Sutton to be saying we need an emergency budget. We need to completely change the budget we set in February. I think we've got ways of managing that. I think there's going to be, depending on government support in the longer term, depending on the size of that and the size of the economic downturn, may mean some difficult decisions for future years' budget. But I don't think there's any consideration that the pension fund contribution would be deferred. I mean, that's a cost that's built in over the medium term and just assumed, obviously, that we have to make those contributions.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
Can you just remind, I should know this, what the funding level is of the Sutton Fund?
90, isn't it, tomorrow? 90%?
Yes, they just produced, the actuaries just produced an updated funding statement. And depending on the various assumptions used, it was between 87 and 92. So yes, comes out at around 90. Okay, yeah, so you're in a reasonable place in terms of funding. Definitely. Yeah, the figure I picked up from the Scheme Advisory Board yesterday, LGPS is 98% funded overall, but the range is between 70 and 125%. So the 98% national figure gives you a full sense of comfort. So you're in, you know, you're probably, I don't know, top half anyway. But okay, any more on that item? No, so we can note that one, and it's a good report. I'll embarrass tomorrow and say I've sent it, and Richard will be pleased about this. I sent it to Southwark Croydon as an example of best practice. So, but
how much are we charging them, Mike?
Right, I did check with Tamara. She told me it was a public document, but yeah, it's worth a pint from somebody, Richard, at some point. Okay. Yeah. Right. No, I thought it was exceptional.
July the 4th.
Yeah, July the 4th. Okay, so, well, I'm conscious Richard's got to leave at 11. Is it okay if I move on to item 14, which is the review of the board's terms of reference while we got Richard? Sharon, are you okay with that? Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. We can just reorder the agenda and move to that item if you wish.
Yeah, I've got one slightly controversial issue I want to raise while Richard's in the room. So if we can move on to item 14, our terms of reference. Tamara, is there anything you want to add? Or I can kick it off. I don't mind.
I don't think so. So I did do a little cleanup of grammar and punctuation, and I tried to make the formatting a little bit clearer, but I haven't changed anything substantive. I've left it as it was. I've made the changes that were incorporated in the 2018 review, but otherwise the document is as is, you would have expected.
And of course, things like our purpose are really prescribed in regulations. There were two areas I just wanted to raise, and that's the issue of paragraph 23 and the vice chair. And I don't sense Andrew's thoughtfully filled the gap, and this is for if my broadband goes down or the M25 beats me one day. So we do need a vice chair. I don't sense, unless I've read it wrong, we've got people queuing up to be vice chair. If anyone, technically we're supposed to rotate this between employer and employee. Andrew's an employer rep, unless I get an indication. So if Andrew's prepared to stay on, I think maybe we just need to tidy up para 23. Sharon and Tamara, any views on that? I'm inclined to take out the rotational bit on that.
Yeah, you could motion that it's recommended that is removed, and ask the board if someone will second it and agree it. And as I've mentioned to you, my understanding of changes to the actual wording would just need to be approved at council. So it'll go through our Strategy and Resources Committee and then be recommended to council to approve the change. But it certainly makes sense in terms of ensuring that you're quorate, because I think the quorum for the board is the chair or vice chair plus a member rep and plus an employee rep. So if the case that, you know, the M25 did beat someone, we need to make sure that we can still meet and have a quorum meeting.
Yeah. Okay. Are people happy with that? So that we the vice chair will be appointed by the board. It won't have to rotate between employer and employee. If you could tidy up the words on that.
Chair, could I just interject, if I may? I'm perfectly happy to carry on as vice chair, but I just wondered, I coming from the background I do, I suspect there was probably at some stage in the past an agreement between the council and the staff side about that. I mean, as I said, I have no problem with it at all. I just wonder whether Bill Cody's got a comment to make on it.
No,
No,
Bill,
okay.
Bill looks fine. Bill looks fine. And do we need to reappoint Andrew, Sharon? Is it a 2-year term or?
I think the term of the vice chair is appointed for 1 year. So
1 year.
Motion that now for now, and then we could, as I say, ask for the recommendation on the actual wording to be taken to be agreed. But you can certainly motion it for the next, so that Mr. Theobald would remain in place.
Well, I'd like to put that forward. Can I have a seconder other than Andrew? William? Yeah. Okay, and unless anyone dissents, we'll go forward with that. Okay, so that if you could tidy all that up, Sharon. I mean, the other issue is probably a bit more difficult. It's really item 53, paragraph 58, sorry. And this is payment of allowances. It's at the bottom of the page there, shall not pay allowances. And really, it's a matter for the administrating body and Richard, and I don't expect an answer today. All I'm asking is that the administrating body consider developing a remuneration strategy and considering planning a small allowance for those board members who don't get remunerated perhaps through their employer. And that really is to acknowledge, I think if you look at the pension regulator stuff, it's all aimed at the pension board rather than the pensions committee. The skills and knowledge, I mean, if anyone's done that Hyman's review, it's frightening what's required. And I think it would help us in terms of pushing board members. If we paid a small allowance, we could not demand, but there'd be a give and take on skills and knowledge. And of course we have breaches, we have certain obligations under breaches. So really I'd like to see us perhaps asking the administrative body to review that particular paragraph in paragraph 58. So Richard, I've dropped you in it there big time.
I think I knew that was coming, Mike. It wasn't too bad. I think it would be helpful if you, if you wrote to, if the rest of the board agreed, if you wrote to informally with some of the rationale for that, because you know it very well in terms of the responsibilities of the board, and you obviously fulfil this role for I think 2 other funds as well. So you've got a kind of wider view of kind of the role of the board and the importance of members of the board being up to speed and taking a full part in the meeting. So I'd have to take that away, obviously, as you said, but I'm happy to consider it. And if you've got any experience of other funds doing that as well, that would be helpful. I know you're probably making the same point with your other.
I am. I understand Barnet make a small allowance, very small allowance. So I have a figure in mind, but that's really. Okay, are the board happy that I write to Richard on those lines? Yeah. So Sharon, if you could draw up, so what we're basically saying is the board agreed the chair would write to Director of Finance or Section 151 officer, administrating body, asking him to review paragraph 58 with a view to developing a remuneration strategy for the board. And then if that's agreed, I'll then write to Richard. Okay.
Lovely, thank you. I was just making sure.
That's fine. So what we've done, we've reviewed the terms of reference, we've changed para 23 as earlier discussed, and we've got a motion up for para 58. So
just with paragraph 23, we've motioned for Mr. Theobald to be left in role for the following year, and we will recommend the change to council. So that was what was motioned and seconded earlier. And I've also noted that as chair, you will write to the Section 151 officer to ask for the review of the paragraph 58.
That's great. That's great. Okay, unless anyone shouts, otherwise we take that as all approved. Thank you. Okay, so we're back on track. So we're now moving on to the training and national LGPS knowledge assessment, which I think is item 7, Tamara. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm just scrolling back to that one.
yeah.
You slightly stole my thunder there by describing this knowledge assessment as frightening, which might not help me to persuade the rest of the members to complete it. I know some of you have already completed it, but it would be extremely helpful if we could get responses from everybody. The idea is not to test your individual knowledge or in any way embarrass you or judge. It's about assessing whether the board as a whole has the required skills and knowledge, and also to assess whether the board, in combination with the committee, has the required skills and knowledge to administer a pension fund. The idea of the survey is that the results will be published at a council level. So there would be a set of results for Sutton. We'd then be able to benchmark ourselves against other LGPS funds, and Hymans would produce a recommendation, a training plan for us, covering the areas that they think needs to be addressed based on the results that have been collated. They've kept the survey open for us. The deadline was actually beginning of June, but they've kept it open for us to see if we can try and get all of our members to complete the survey. So I would implore you to please to do it if you haven't done it yet. It isn't easy, I have to say, but it is. I think it gives a fair idea of the areas that that are required. And I did it, and I found it useful, if slightly frustrating at times. But it certainly pushes you to investigate areas that you might not be so knowledgeable about.
Okay, Andrew's indicating.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just check that I'm understanding this right? Are we talking about the actual assessment of our knowledge that I did actually complete? Is that the one you're talking about? Because it sounds a little bit, if you're talking about actual training itself, Tamara.
So the first stage is for members of the board to complete that individual assessment, which you've done. And then those results are collated across the group as a whole, so that we can see if everybody has gaps in a certain area, then we can see that the whole board has a gap in a particular area, and it's an area we need to focus on.
Right, so there's no training's been set up yet. The reason I ask you, I don't know if my comments that I put at the end of my assessment were shared with you. I'm going to share them with you all now. I was a bit annoyed about the way the assessment was conducted. Now, I'll read out what I said. I was able to, although I'm pretty technically useless, I was able to copy and paste this, so I hang on to it. And it said, I think that this questionnaire has assumed a level of the technical knowledge of lay pension board members like myself that is wholly unrealistic. Not ever having had any training on the legislation referred to, I do not understand many of the questions and was not impressed that I was forced to guess at an answer rather than being able to tick a box that said, I don't know. That was not an option. You had to make a statement, or you had to fit your reply into their statements. You couldn't say. I mean, there were a number of things. I just didn't. I guessed quite accurately, as it turned out. I scored far better than I thought I was going to. But I went on to say, whilst governance and performance are matters that rightly fall within the purview of pension board members, the depth of legislative and technical knowledge that this survey requires is, in my opinion, not, and is instead the responsibility of the professional officers and advisors that support the pension board. And of course, we're very fortunate in the support and advice that we get. What you were saying just now has sort of slightly alleviated my fears, because you're saying this is an assessment of the pension board as a whole. That did not come across from the wording of the actual assessment itself. It came very much as if you're looking at the individual. And whereas I do know a little bit about governance and a little bit about the basics of pension funds and investments. There was a huge, I mean, Section 8 actuarial methods, standards and practices. I scored 16% on that, which is hardly surprising. So that I was a little bit concerned about the way that this seemed to have been. This was a survey or an assessment written by actuaries. I felt for actuaries, not for mere mortals like myself. But I thought I'd pass that on. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I think they're buying. I mean, tomorrow you comment if you want, but for warts and all, I do think it's a very worthwhile thing to do, and it's all anonymous. So you know, if you have to guess, and just do it, and then what tomorrow we'll get is an overall view, and we can tailor our skills and training sessions specifically for the Sutton board, and I'm sure tomorrow will be pragmatic. I think you raised good points there, Andrew. It does almost assume a level of knowledge. You're right. At the end of the day, you know, when it comes to procurement, we would look to Tamara and Richard saying, you know, have you procured in the right way, etc., etc. But you know, my point. Sorry if I did overmade that point, but it reinforces the importance of the board, and this is not an easy job to do. And interestingly enough, the onus on skills and knowledge is more on board members than on committee members. I suspect that may be corrected at a future date, but I would encourage you, warts and all, have a go at it. You know, there's no comeback. It does help Tamara develop a plan for us. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah. Tamara, anything you...
You're not the only person to have raised the issue around the way the questions were designed. I think it's probably true that it was designed by people who've recently taken a lot of exams. It was kind of exam technique focus on it. Your strategy in guessing answers or figuring out the double negatives in questions was perhaps something they could look at for the future. And I think we have suggested that to them. But stepping back, I do think the framework of content is broadly what is going to be required of board members going forward.
Yeah, understanding that now, I agree. I'm glad I did it, and it's obviously worth everybody else doing it as well. It was just that I was a bit indignant. Why are they expecting me to know about this? Clearly, I hadn't understood the full purpose of it. So thank you for that.
Okay, so Sharon, we approve that recommendation unless anyone says otherwise. We agree to complete the survey.
Could you just read that one as it's an agreement rather than a noting? Would you mind reading the recommendation?
Okay, yeah. Members of the Pension Board are asked to agree to complete the National Knowledge Assessment by the end of June to enable compilation of a tailored training plan for the group and benchmarking against other authorities. So somebody can move that. Thank you. Yeah, Andrew, and seconded. Michael or Bill?
Yeah, I do.
Yep, thank you. So that's done. So I would ask you to, could you resend the link tomorrow to all members?
Yes, I actually sent it to everyone who hadn't completed it yesterday.
Oh, okay, that's
you should have an email in your inbox from me.
Okay, so you haven't got one. That's great. Okay, let's move on to the next item, which is update on the good governance review, which has been rattling around and deferred. And Tamara, just bring us up to date on this one.
So when we were putting together the agenda for this meeting, we were still expecting the phase 3 reports to come out in the autumn. However, in May, the Scheme Advisory Board, I believe, took the decision to stand down the working group that was working on this. So we're not expecting a phase 3 report to come out with a proposal for formal consultation. So the document that was published last November is still out there, and it's still very much the direction of travel, I believe. But there's a kind of limbo in terms of next steps. which is slightly difficult because there are certain things we'd be wanting to start to put in place, and we may need to hold off on some of them. There are some things which are still undecided. For example, whether the governance audit would need to be completed by an internal or external party. There was some discussion that you might be able to ask your own internal audit or another authority's internal audit to do that governance review for you. But I think it's more likely that it's going to be an external audit firm that's required to do that audit. And that's just one example of where we can't start putting in place any concrete plans for the future because these questions are not yet firmly decided. Again, it repeats the emphasis on training and skills required for everybody involved in managing LGPS schemes, and consideration of governance issues, not just by the board, but within the administering authority as well. And so the discussion around separating the role of the LGPS officer from that of the council's 151 officer hasn't yet reached any firm conclusions. But again, clearly the direction of travel is that the authority must make it clear how they deal with that conflict of interest. So we're sort of in limbo. So I'm not proposing that we consider any concrete actions at this stage, but it's worth keeping that list of recommendations at the back of the Hyman's document in mind over the next few meetings, because yes, I think some of them will eventually end up as requirements in some form or other.
Okay. Just a couple of things to add to the issues. Conflicts of interest. I'm not sure. We haven't got a conflicts of interest policy specifically for the pension fund, have we?
Not that I'm aware of.
No, I don't know, Sharon. I think we have the conflicts of interest policy for Sutton, the host authority. Not for now, but that's one issue I think we just need to keep an eye on. I think they're going to encourage pension funds to have their own conflicts of interest. Good example is the actuarial evaluation, which if it's Sutton's conflicts of interest policy, wouldn't include that. But one would expect there to be a conflict at Pensions Committee when discussing the actuarial evaluation, because all the councillors around the table are, are councillors of Sutton. The other issue is again, just for keeping, is Sutton, I think, are unusual in not having employer and employee reps at its main committee in an observer status. So as this goes through the sausage machine, there are two issues that I'd certainly be keeping an eye on going forward. But yeah, we await the outcome, don't we? Hopefully in the autumn later this year. But
well, I think given that the working committee is no longer working, I expect it won't be this year. It'll be middle of next year at the earliest.
Okay, yeah.
Which is slightly frustrating.
Yeah,
I do think those things that you've mentioned do need to be looked at, but we don't want to put something firmly in place that we then have to backtrack on.
No point. Roger Phillips spoke at this thing I was at yesterday, and he seemed to be a bit more upbeat about timescales, but who knows? But yeah, there's no point in doing any change until you see the outcome of that. So unless anyone's indicating, the recommendation there is to note the summary recommendations in the phase 2 report, albeit they might only draft. So everyone happy with that? And, yeah. So Sharon, we can approve that recommendation. Yeah. So let's move on now to Pension Board annual report. This was done some time ago, wasn't it? Page 5762. Tamara, you could say, there's not a lot to add to it, is there? If you want to say something.
No. So this is the document that we were due to look at back in March. I've just made some small changes to the wording because it read slightly strangely given COVID-19 had happened in the interim. But otherwise, it's the same document that you would have discussed before.
So I think it's a good resume, and does it go into your pension fund annual report and accounts, or does it go on anywhere from here, or do you know?
Yes, it would go into the pension fund annual report.
Okay, yeah. Has anyone got any issues on this? I mean, I think it's a fairly bland report, and it looks back. So approve the draft pension board annual report, recommended, no dissensions. That's fine, thank you. And now we're on to the business plan. And this is really a precursor to our own work plan in many respects. Tamara, anything you want to add on this one?
Again, this is a document that was prepared for your last meeting. I don't think I've made any changes at all to this one. But what I would say is that we are looking internally within the council at how we resource the pensions function, and as part of that work, we are looking across the expenditure on pension issues, and so what we are paying for as a whole in order to administer the pension fund. And I would personally be quite keen for there to be more sort of more detailed scrutiny of what we are paying in total for managing the pension fund, including both internal staff costs within the council, of administration, also the cost of advisors, custodians and other service providers. Fund manager fees obviously is the big one. That's where the bulk of the money goes. But then if you add all of that together, are we paying the right amount for what we're getting? Is the pension fund being charged a sensible amount? And how do we, if we think that overall amount is sensible, could we look at how we split that amount? You know, we pay the fund managers an awful lot of money. In return, they're supposed to provide some sort of soft benefits like training and information. Some of them are better at it than others. Are we getting value for money from them? Are the things we could do better ourselves in-house? Equally, are the things we are doing in-house currently more effectively procure from outside? So all of those things I think needs to be reviewed in some detail. Obviously in conjunction with what we also need to do for Kingston.
Okay, yeah, I mean the management fees, just looking at the expenses, out of 7.3 million, 6.3 is management and custodian, so a big number there.
And the custodian isn't significant. It's
no. I always feel the admin side's very much a Cinderella service, and it shouldn't be, because we're only here to pay benefits at the end of the day. But any member, just a couple of points on the business plan that we've discussed today, really. It's the review of employer covenants under pensions admin. You alluded to that earlier, whether that needs to be picked up as an amendment to the business plan. And this review of what we talked about just now, you know, the review at Scheme Advisory Board of good governance. It would be good for that to go to Pensions Committee at some point. I'm not sure that the phase. I'm not sure whether these phase 1, phase 2 reports have been to Pensions Committee, but you might just want to think about. Have they?
Yes.
Yeah, you might just want to find a slot 21, 22 even for that report. They're the only 2 points I had on the business plan. But no, it's a good, and I think you're right that, you know, have a good old review at the expenses. I mean, there is benchmarking available on this, but of course the big problem with benchmarking is, are you comparing like with like? And there was a cost transparency initiative carried out by the Scheme Advisory Board, but again, I don't know where that's got to. But
it's sort of up and running. It's in its teething phase at the moment. There's been a few technical issues with the portal, so I don't think anyone's got very meaningful information out of it yet. But and again, it doesn't really work for the less liquid asset classes.
No.
All of these things assume everyone is just invested in liquid equities funds. And as people move into infrastructure and private assets, all of these initiatives just break down.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, so we note the business plan. We might just want to keep an eye on that for our own work program. So that brings us on to the work program, and I think we've got quite an extensive list there. So rather than ask Tamara, any member on our work program, we've got this cybersecurity thing rattling around that we've promised ourselves some training on, and Tamara's put that in for October. And that, I was at a session with the regulator yesterday. That's clearly, sorry, I think Amazon Prime's just going to ring at my door. Hopefully my other half is around. So yeah, cybersecurity is a big deal. And the regulators put that high on the list. The problem with cybersecurity, when I've had sessions at the boards, we get the council's cybersecurity thing in. And I've seen people say, well, look, cybersecurity of our suppliers is their job. But, we're really looking for something a bit wider than that. The rest of it, the only other thing I had listed tomorrow, there was the regulator has produced a survey of public sector schemes. I can send you some stuff on this. And it compares the LGPS to other public sector schemes, and the LGPS comes out of it very well. It would be good to see our Sutton positions against that. But rather than program, if I could send you the detail, it might be quite an onerous job. Okay. So I'm asking you to do. So let me, if the board's happy, we'll have a dialogue, and I don't want to just sort of burn with that. But yeah, it's worth a look at. So, and then the training, what you're saying, let's wait to see the outcome of the Hyman's stuff. Mm-hmm. Then we can start to populate training going forward. Yeah. But I think we got more than enough to contend with there. Any member on the work plan? Okay, so we'll agree that for the next two meetings.
So if we could just read that one read it out.
To agree the work program for the board for the next two meetings. Yeah, and if the board agree that the chair discuss separately with the I forgot your job, whatever Tamara's job title is, on the programming of the recently released TPR survey on public sector schemes.
So if I'm going to add that, shall I add, did you want me to add that one in to add to the work program? Sorry, can you say that again? The TPR survey.
Right. Yeah, so the board agreed that the chair discuss with the interim whatever investment officer the programming of the TPR survey on public sector scheme governance.
Lovely. And can I have a seconder to that, please?
Yep, Andrew, thank you. Okay, yep, so we're not putting it in yet. We're just, you're authorising me to have a discussion with Tamara.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to the next item, which is review of risk register. And did you have a global pandemic on the risk register? Tamara, head of pension investments. I've got it at long last. Just a few words on this one for us.
So this is the document that last went to the committee. It hasn't changed since you last saw it. One thing I need to draw your attention to is that this this kind of format of the risk register with these coloured dots in a grid, that was a database that's no longer supported by the council. So we're going to have to come up with a new format for the risk register going forward. You might notice that some of the some of the points haven't been kind of perfectly updated. So people have updated the text, but the actual bubbles haven't moved, and that's because we don't have access to this system anymore. So we need to think about what we do going forward. It's going to have to be in a Google Sheets format, so it's going to have to be slightly simpler. I mean, I think the drawback of this existing framework was that it was incredibly difficult to incorporate sort of common sense overlay to it. You were forced to list your risks in a certain way, and if some of them were linked to each other, you couldn't then put that information closer together, for example. So it made the risk register incredibly long and not very focused. So we can certainly make it more tailored to what will be useful for both the committee and then for you to review. So any comments you have on the formatting would be interesting and useful. In terms of the actual risks themselves, as I said, this is the last version that the committee has looked at. The one that I think needs considering is the employer covenant issue, employer financial strength issue, but we've discussed that already. And obviously investment risks are discussed regularly at the committee. So while they remain significant risks, they will also remain on the agenda for the committee at all times. So I don't think there's any danger of those risks being overlooked. Whereas I think the employer covenant risks, for example, are the ones more likely to get overlooked.
Okay. Anything more? Any other format? I know the lack of colour was an issue at one time, but
yeah,
a few skirmishes on that one. On the covenant risk, I was quite just talk us through. So we've got clearly it's a risk. Then we got the mitigation, and then the residual risk goes green. And I know this was done before COVID-19, but I just wonder whether whether it deserved an amber at least. But maybe it's probably a function of the algorithm.
So I think there were some issues where it had gone green on the basis that the remedial action was planned and then may not necessarily have been completed.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that was the only one that kicked out. I mean, I always felt it was a pretty thorough document, but yeah, anything you can do, I mean, it should be a document that just rolls off each quarter. So if you can reduce the resources you have to put into it, I think that'd be a good thing. Anything else on format? I always found the format, I suppose I spend a lot of time looking at this stuff. As I say, everyone, all organisations, I mean, when I was at Bexley, we'd spend hours as a corporate board doing risk registers. Never had a bloody global pandemic on any of this stuff. And, it's like the really big catastrophic risk. You can't. What mitigation would you put in as a single organisation? I mean, governments couldn't put mitigation in, but I suppose in a way it is in here because it hasn't got global pandemic, but it's got collapse in equity markets. It is at the level below it. It does pick up the consequences of a pandemic. Okay, anything more on the risk register? No. So what have we got? Have we noting that? Let me just have a look. Yeah, to note and comment on the risk register. So everyone's happy with that. Fine, thank you. So that brings, we've done 14. So we're now on to any urgent business. Is there anything? No. And I assume nobody wants to raise any exempt items or any, no, all nodding. So Sharon, we've nearly survived this technological challenge, haven't we?
Yeah, we're nearly there.
Yeah. I think that's it, isn't it?
Yeah. So just want to say the meeting has ended and the time.
Oh, yeah. Let me go back to Sharon's given me some absolutely superb guidance here, which I've forgotten to look at. Yeah, okay, so I shall do Sharon's guidance justice. So I want to thank again members for taking the time to take part in this virtual meeting today, and to thank officers who have set up this meeting whilst helping the council to respond to the COVID-19 situation. Sorry, I mean the amount of work Sharon's putting behind the scenes and being very patient with technological idiots like myself. We come a long way from the first one where I was getting everything in stereo, so we have moved on from the first test I've done. But I'm genuinely, and I do think it's kept the momentum going. I think as a board we've developed a momentum, and although this, I have to say, is not as good as a physical meeting, it keeps the thing going. I think that's key. So as there's no further business, I end this meeting at 11:20.
Well done, Chair. Thank you.
Have safe